Today's open is a simple headline. The NBA's biggest offseason stories in no particular order of importance, but I'm trying to figure out what the biggest ones were because we had a bunch of cannon fire over the weekend, bunch of shots, bunch of news up into the air, and I want to put them all together. Again, the ones that seem like they're the most important, and then we're going to kind of sift through them, and Rudy's going to jump in a little bit later, all right? So we'll see if I leave out anything here, too, which is always a possibility. I'm going to start with the Lakers, not because it's the most important, because they're associated with the most players. Over the weekend, I've read they have interest in Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, Damian Lillard, Spencer Dinwiddie, Buddy Hield, and Pat Mahomes, which I don't know how he would fit, but it makes sense. Talented player. But that's how it works. I mean, it's the Lakers, first of all. Magic Johnson just tweeting out left and right about Chris Paul. I think Magic Johnson was the source on a bunch of this stuff. And, that's just a weird dynamic with this team. It's not that bad, right? It doesn't prevent you from winning. It's still Magic Johnson. But, there's a lot of stuff that happens here. It also is what happened with that whole Kawhi thing when he was going to the Lakers. It was Magic Johnson just straight up being like, yeah, we got him. Done and done. We got him. It was like, do you? And Kawhi was like, no, actually, I'm not going there. So, the Lakers part of this, it's much like the Yankees during the trade deadline or free agency. Anyone that's worth it is somehow connected to them. So let's talk about what's real and what isn't. The Chris Paul, the Lakers thing doesn't work for a million different reasons. And I'm not saying it's impossible, although I feel like it's impossible because there have been plenty of times, certainly with stars, orchestrating things, you're like, oh, that'll never happen. And you're like, oh, wow, that happened. But I just don't think it's going to happen based on common sense and a bit of information. If we go over the numbers, Chris Paul has a player option for $44.2 million. If he were to opt out of that, the Lakers, now they could get to, in a weird way, a totally unfeasible and uncharacteristic way, they could get to like $20 million in cap space. That would be just detaching themselves from all of their assets, which doesn't make any sense. So that's not going to happen. The non-taxpayer exception, if they were under the tax, would be somewhere between 9 and 10 million, depending on where the cap lands at 112 million, I believe, for this next season. And then a $6 million, just under $6 million tax exception. So the taxpayer, the non-tax. So we're talking about like a pay cut of 35 million to like 39 million, 38 million. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Does it make a lot of sense basketball-wise? I've always felt like throughout all of LeBron's career and the quest for some of these other players, he never should play with a point guard. He should always play with a ball-handling two guard that can make shots. And actually, that's what has happened more often than not. But all these years of, what about this, or a trade here, or a tweak there, all these different things, when it's a traditional point guard, I think it's just redundant. Although Paul and LeBron are so smart that maybe they could kind of figure it out. But there's another thing that would have to happen here. Chris Paul would have to want to play there. And I don't think that he necessarily wants to go there now that he has this Suns team positioned the way he does. Now, are they the favorites in the West? Absolutely not. They could be behind a handful of teams next year, maybe 3 teams, maybe it's 5. I don't know. We'll see how the rest of this offseason shakes out. But at least Phoenix is in the mix, and it's another year together after they went through and, had a tough loss in the finals. So the only thing I would throw out on the Chris Paul front is, as of last week, I had heard that the Suns, and again, this could have changed by the time you're hearing this podcast, but by late last week, I had heard that depending on what Paul does here, it'd be nice to hear from the Phoenix Suns. And I had heard that he had not, his party had not heard from ownership. And that's the part of this. If you're a Suns fan, you're like, is Sarver really going to screw this one up? Is he going to be cheap here? Look, the Suns aren't going to do a sign and trade to help the Lakers. They're not going to do a sign and trade to help Chris Paul move on. But where the Suns could screw this up is if they play it cheap and go, hey, maybe you go ahead and set the market and then we'll see what happens. Drag their feet, insult Chris Paul, and then he decides, you know what, I'm going to go take money somewhere else. But again, the money is so short in just a straight up transaction with the Lakers. I just have a hard time believing that. And remember Chris Paul, when he left the Clippers and went to Houston, the reason that was so surprising is like, wait, he's going to give up the extra year? And he did. He did give up that extra year. So there you go. Now, Russell Westbrook, he's at $44 million and $47 million. If you look at the trades and how it would work, it'd be Kuzma, it'd be Montrezl Harrell picking up the option, it'd be Pope. And, you could get there. But then you have to ask yourself, do you want this to happen if you're a Lakers fan? Now, we all know my position on Westbrook, but I could actually kind of see this argument, at least for the regular season, because I think there's a level here of energy that Westbrook plays with where he would take games over, take possessions over, and I actually think he would make it easier on guys like Anthony Davis and LeBron James over the course of the season. So there's part of me that actually could kind of understand this. Now, the reason this transitions into another big storyline, and that's the Wizards storyline this offseason, is that don't underestimate the Wizards' desire to be mediocre. And by mediocre, I mean, a 7-8 seed with the play-in games, even more margin for error. They were a hot team to close things out last year. They still weren't great, and we saw that in that Sixers series. And then they also had their own injuries that they were dealing with there a little bit. But if Westbrook is cool at 44 and 47 million next year, and Beal, and there was a ton of Beal stuff out there this weekend, but it was all very much the same. And it's kind of been the same that we've been talking about here on this podcast. There doesn't seem to be this urgency from Bradley Beal to want to ask out and move on. We had Tommy Shepard on, the GM, and I kept kind of just going down that road. And I don't expect the GM to be like, yeah, he totally wants out. He hates it here. That's not what he was going to say, but it backed up a lot of the stuff you'd heard that Beal's like, yeah, I'm just kind of content. And Beal may be waiting on figuring out what that 5-year extension is with Washington, getting that. And then once he has that, then maybe deciding to ask to move on at some point. But if Beal does not push the issue for a trade, which it appears he is not doing now, not saying it won't change, but at least as of now, he's cool with it, then it may also mean that the Wizards are cool with hanging on to Westbrook and hoping to win 40-plus games and be in the playoffs again. Again, do not underestimate the Wizards' desire to be mediocre. So that's where we're at with Beal. Beal has short money, but what's funny is that we have two examples here of guys on much longer contracts potentially asking out. Now, the reason I would transition from Beal into Damian Lillard is that as of now, even though there was a report last week saying that we're 2 weeks away, so I guess we'd be a week away now of Damian Lillard asking out officially, he'd be asking out in an unprecedented way, which is also kind of what Ben Simmons is doing because he wants out as well in Philadelphia. So Lillard has 3 years, and it's 40, 42, and 46 million, and then a player's option, which I don't know how much that changes things. I don't know if the team goes, hey, look, you don't really have as much leverage as you think. So if you come to us and demand a trade, it doesn't mean we're just going to put you somewhere that you want to go, because now the team has you under contract for 3 plus the option. Whereas in another situation where the star is asking out and he has like a year plus left, the new team is like, look, we trade for him, but if we give you assets for this guy and he's going to bounce, we only have him for a year and a half or just a year, it's not really worth it to us. So this is new. Like, this is new territory here. Max deals kicking in and then players potentially asking for a trade. But the rumors, again, this is me just making calls and talking draft and, hey, what are you hearing and that kind of stuff. I'm not a reporter. I think you guys know that, but I try to share what I can that makes sense. And the Lillard thing still feels like Beal a bit passive right now. And again, it could change, but until it changes, Portland's not going to go out of their way to move Lillard because you're going to lose that trade. Now, would Portland do CJ McCollum for Ben Simmons? I actually think they would. Is that what you want if you're Philadelphia? Well, you may not want it still in July, but I don't know. I don't know what the other options are going to be now. Now, in comparison to Beal and Lillard, where I still feel like it's a bit passive, we'll see how this plays out. Things could change. Simmons seems a certainty. All right. It doesn't seem like he's going to be on Philadelphia when the season starts. And that's both information and everything you're reading. Now, I don't know what Daryl Morey will do if he doesn't like the offers. He's usually not one to just capitulate and just be like, all right, I got to give in here. It's always kind of funny whenever I read the stories on this stuff, because you'll be like, oh, well, this is coming from this side and this is coming from that side. And who knows, some of my information could be coming from one side and I could be a little off on it too. But it feels like this is like Philadelphia and Ben Simmons and his agency Clutch. It feels like they already know what they want from each other. All right. And this is another guy with a 4-year contract on the books. So how much can he really call his shots? If Ben Simmons wants to be in LA at some point, okay, cool. But you can't dictate where you're going as much as a guy can who has just a year or maybe a year and a half, 2 years left on his deal. You have 4 years left on your deal, and it's $147 million. But I would say of all the rumblings of these guys moving around in these big offseason stories, the Simmons stuff seems more certain that they're going to try to find a way to move on before the season starts. But again, we'll see. Does it happen before the draft? Does it happen during free agency? Does it happen late? We've had that happen a couple times where we thought everything was done. Westbrook has been part of 2 of those transactions the last couple of years where it looked like everything is done and all the NBA writers are in Europe on vacation, and then they find out another star has been moved. So to summarize, Dame passive, Beal perhaps even more passive, Simmons, this is maybe not publicly a problem right now, but I'd say it's going to be a less passive transaction or push at some point. The two other storylines that I have for you, the Warriors, how do they play into all this, waiting around? How do they use these assets? Because this is absolutely like a line in the sand from, it's not exactly AD in Christian years here, but what we're saying is whatever 2021 is, like we'll be able to point back to that and how these assets are used and whether they're extending their championship window or if it didn't work out. And I don't know. I don't know that it's just as simple as packaging everything together and asking any of these guys if they're available, because it doesn't look like Dame would want to go there. It looks like Beal may not work. Simmons, in this case, I just don't know how you'd play him with Draymond and all that kind of stuff. Is there another player that makes a lot of sense for them? And then my favorite rumor, we're on about, 37 months of this, Lonzo to the Chicago Bulls. I mean, this is the single longest day. You know who really likes Lonzo Ball? Yes, the Chicago Bulls. We are aware. I checked in on like 3 different stories on it this morning. So those are the big off-season storylines. Trying to sum them up as best I can. We'll have Suri jump on after the break.